Can we therefore make a start to the formal meeting? Agenda item 1, declarations of personal or prejudicial interests. Does anyone have any to declare? No. Okay. Apologies for absence. I'm not aware of any, John. I think
we've got no apologies, Chair.
That's fine. Agenda item 3 then, the minutes of the last meeting on the 25th of November. Simply to confirm these as a correct record. I was happy with them. Does anyone have any comments or questions on them? Obviously, we'll pick up matters arising in the next agenda item. Happy? Yeah. Okay. That's that. We can therefore move on to item 4, which is the action log resulting from previous discussions and decisions of the committee. I'll open this up. I've got 1 or 2 issues, but I'll open this up to any colleagues to pick up any points they want to pick up with officers. Does anyone else have anything first before I mention 1 or 2 things? Okay. Shall I pick up my points then? Item 245, which relates to the assurance map and the core strategic plan. I do note that that's been on there now for just over 3 years, and obviously we are making progress with the new assurance map. Is that at a point where it can be closed, or does the presence of a new Chief Constable mean strategic priorities will change and therefore it probably needs to stay on there? That's really my question. So if that's for Jason as much as anyone.
It is, Chair. So good afternoon, everybody. The new Chief has given an outline of his vision and strategic priorities, which have been worked through our corporate planning, which will be ready for sign off in our corporate planning meeting on the 26th of February. So I think it probably is appropriate, David, just to keep it on the agenda at the moment, where I can give an update our next meeting of what they look like, and again the connectivity between the assurance map and obviously then the wider bit around force priorities. Okay.
If I can pick up another issue, it regards to the issue of some confusion about the regional collaboration briefing, which we were going to have today, but some confusion about who was delivering it means we're not going to have it today. We'll have to keep that one on the agenda and get a date for that to take place, hopefully in the next month or 2, if everyone's in agreement with that. Yeah. Okay. The other item I wanted to raise was under 328, which is the impact of COVID. And it mentions there in the comment about a report that's gone to the Police and Crime Strategic Board of lessons learned, and offering to share that with the committee, I presume on an informal basis as an information item. Personally, I think that would be useful to see. I'm sure fellow committee members would agree with that. If that's okay, we would welcome a sight of that.
Yeah, I could sort that out, Chair. Leave that with me. I'll make sure that's circulated.
Okay, thank you. I didn't have anything else at this stage on the items listed here. Does anyone else have anything? Okay. Can we move on then to agenda item 5, which is the internal audit progress report? Mark.
Good afternoon, everybody. So presenting the paper today on the progress report. Pleased to say we're providing two further final reports to yourselves today, and we'll kind of get to those as we proceed. But I think it's just worth kind of highlighting that we've had a kind of busy Q3 and we will have a busy Q4 period in terms of completing your plan. So we've got draft reports in the out currently. Well, in fact, fleet management went as final at the end of last week. Recruitment, follow-up and procurement are both sat in draft. We've completed the fieldwork for the core financial audits as well, so those draft reports will be coming out shortly as well. And then across February and March, we've got the remaining audits planned in, with the workforce planning audit, which would be the last one in the plan, will just sneak into the first week of April. So obviously, ideally, we'd like to get it done before the 31st of March. But I think considering how kind of maybe late we started and our ability to get it all done, I think that is actually quite a good position to be in, to be honest. So and then I suppose in terms of the collaboration audits, again, those have been completed. just into the start of February as well. Although in that respect, we did a priority-based approach based on time left in the year, and we'll just be completing 2 out of the 3, with the third one being deferred into next year. So that's one of the collaboration audits won't go ahead, unfortunately, just due to timing. And there was a priority-based approach where all the CFOs ranked the 3 that we'd already agreed upon in a priority-based order, and we're doing the 2 that were the highest priority across that was agreed upon. I'll probably just pause there, Chair, in terms of obviously the reports are, the 2 final reports are in the paper in the summary under A3. I'll probably just take it as read and then just pause for questions, David, rather than go through anything specific.
Thank you. Colleagues, have you questions? Particularly, I think Ian, you had some issues, I think a number of us did, on archive management.
Yes, please. I mean, I suppose there's probably 2 or 3 areas on there for me, Mark. I mean, and perhaps Jason as well, obviously tying into the answer on this one. I know we're going to come on to the progress and the implementation report, and actually the answers that we got on the implementation and the updates were actually really quite thorough. But when I actually looked at responses in the reports themselves, they really weren't. And I wasn't sure why it took so long to get some good answers and some action. But standing back from that, when I look at some of the resolutions that we get to, they seem to be and have been actioned. My concern is the fact that this has gone on for a number of years or a period of time, and we had the issue with the media, for example, that just seems to be resolved, yet the system seems not to have been challenged. We just came up with stuff. I just wanted more of a sense of that, really, Jason, from your side. Because it looked like a bit of a car crash, if I'm honest.
Yeah, so in terms of the archive, we can make reference to the archive piece first, and I'm very happy to take some feedback in terms of the general, if there's some general issues as well, Ian. The archive one, so in terms of the progress and implementation, you probably find that's more detailed because, and I think it's just the workflow where these reports go to when they come into the force. The reality is, obviously, I get a pre-brief before we have this meeting anyway, and it's linked into some of our governance arrangements around managing performance. But clearly, in terms of some of the audits that come in don't directly come to me; they go into other business areas. And one of the things we're trying to work out at the minute is that all the audits reports should come into me, so I'm cited on all of them. And I think this is a good example where ultimately, if I am cited on it, I then can do the probe in to be clear on what we are doing around it and not. And that's why you're probably seeing a more detailed implementation update than you are seeing in the actual report that was obviously Mark makes reference to earlier on. The reality is that's still not where it needs to be. There's more work we're doing around it. And again, it's just the relationship with the audit team, making sure when it does come through with Sharon and Julie particularly, that as again I get cited on it to make sure, firstly, I'm happy we've been allocated to. I'm happy in terms of the management statement of what we're doing about it and what's our plan around it. But then more importantly, and I think this is probably for yourselves, is there's some governance to make sure there's some accountability for the delivery of it. And that includes where we may push back saying is actually, whilst recognising the recommendation, for a number of reasons, we may not do it now, we may do it in the future, but being very clear in terms of how we're going to manage it, particularly with timescales as well. Does that answer your question?
On that, is that it stands to, I think it's recommendation 3, the audit regime, where basically the response is, as I read it, we haven't got the resources to do this, and we're basically going to have to take the risk.
So, and Chair, that's the exact point. So if let's be honest, there's lots of areas we'd love to do more audit round, not in just in terms of making sure we've got assurance that we're doing it right, but importantly, we can improve service to the wider public as well. And the reality, this is one of those areas where, yes, if we had more resource, we'd probably do more work with it. But again, to be fair, looking at other things we'd like to do audit with, we'd probably focus on other areas first of all. Let's be honest, again, lots of conversation we've had previously around making sure we're recording crime accurately.
Yes.
The consequence of not getting that right, that would be one that would always, because ultimately, if we get crime levels recording wrong, as you know very well, not just in terms of the consequences around force confidence, but in terms of wider victim confidence and not making sure they're signposted to the right services, there'd be lots of issues lost there. Now, we are fortunate with the support of the Police and Crime Commissioner. We've got some additional, very small amount of audit capacity increase for the next 2 years. But again, our focus will be making sure that direct contact with the public, we're getting that bit right, which includes not just crime recording, but again, linked to the code of practice around victim care and everything else as well. So it's not saying we would not like to do it. The reality is we have to balance the prioritisation around capability and capacity, if I'm honest.
Okay.
David, if I may just finish off, Jason. So in answer, I think you've part answered the question. Like I say, when you got involved, the quality of the action and answer was stark. So yes, please. But again, I suppose it's standing back from this and saying, just as an archives, there was something blatantly not happening around the media where the system wasn't working. So people just stopped doing something. And I think it's that more my concern is about the behavior or the culture, and therefore my natural extrapolation is what else is operating like that, where people try and go, oh, well, boom. And that is probably my bigger concern based on what I've seen later on. That's my worry.
Yeah, no, and I get that. So one of the things, firstly, because the result of the new chief coming in and his visioning a bit about that empowerment and the front end about, don't wait for it not to work. Try and do something with it, but escalate up if you're not getting the support you need by other services. But we are also doing at the minute a significant piece of work around culture of the organisation, which again will be part of that piece in. So it's not about the blame bit of it. If it's not working, we expect people not just sit and wait. They would come forward and say, I've tried to do this, it's not working, escalate up. And then importantly, not wait for sign off by chief officers, but actually giving that empowerment to say, yeah, go on, it's your area of work, it's your expertise. Let's be honest, a lot of this. If you make it so it's more effective, then get on with it. If it's not working though, and you've got some blockers, then it needs escalating up. And whether that comes to chief officers or some of our senior leaders below us, then clearly that should happen. So Ian, we're not there yet. We know we're not. We are making strides, and hopefully you can see from some of the updates. But it's important. This is a evolving journey where ultimately we're trying to say to our staff, look, you are destinies of you are the people that will destiny your own futures. So it's about you making sure that your systems and processes are working in line with regulation, but to levels that make a real difference to your function, which makes a difference to the public as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else on that?
Could I ask a question on it? And it's not directly on the audit report, but what struck me was the operations archive seemed to be very similar to the system you had in hospitals 15, 20 years ago, where patients would turn up and it was a nightmare to find the records. A more general question, really. Have you given thought, or has thought been given elsewhere, to actually digitalising the archives, at least for new stuff coming in?
So we are. So one of the things we are going through the process at the minute is around the procurement of a digital asset management system, which obviously in terms of not just in terms of our own things that we've got, but importantly where we send it on to other organisations. So Crown Prosecution Service is a good example. So again, to give you assurance there, one of the things that we are looking at as part of our digital asset management procurement is about how we can utilise that system for some of the things we're talking about today. The reality is that takes time, and it's not going to be here for at least 6 to 12 months at the earliest, I'm very honest. What we have done, as you can see from the updates, where we can see, and you've identified from the audit some risk, we've made sure that there's some stuff being put in place now that, again, doing some benchmarking with colleagues, not just in the region, nationally, is in keeping with practice which is not digitally asset managed at the moment, and therefore in terms of assurance of, yes, we've done more to mitigate some of the risk, not mitigating sense of permanent, because there's always risk with anything like that, but the reality is in terms of the levels of risk, we're happy it's a lower level, and therefore once we get the digital asset management stuff, we can certainly make sure we then transition into that capability as well.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. On the other report, the Victims Code of Practice follow-up, the first recommendation relates to service user feedback, and I think again we've got a situation where there's quite a short initial response but a very detailed response in the action plan, which I read it to say is we're not going in-house at the moment, we're going to stick with this Leicestershire model for another year and basically see how it goes. Is that correct, Jason?
It is, and one of the challenges, Chair, around this is in terms of it's the timing of it. So the COVID bit, in terms of us doing some more work around where do we send it to, what do we actually want to get the answers from, will take more time, and we haven't got that time at the moment. So the Leicestershire one is not just done by ourselves, by other forces use the Leicestershire survey. What we want to do though is, which is part of the audit, is we want to make sure that the information we're getting back adds the value in terms of how we shape our services for the future. And there is issues around the Leicestershire survey at the minute where some of the questions that are asked don't necessarily reflect practice in terms of policing response now. So I use by way of example, vehicle crime. We obviously attend a lot less vehicle crimes now, because if someone's car's stolen, whilst we will attend, obviously in terms of circumstances, the reality is we will attend less of those because the reality of the crimes being committed, there's no CCTV, etc., etc. What will change in the future is that at the moment is some of the questions, did an officer attend? And if they say no, and did not get advice there, that's actually can be seen as a negative response around satisfaction. Now, clearly that's not reflective of how we deliver service to the public. So one of the things we want to do is spend the time now, keep the literature survey that we've got, and make sure we utilise the information better than we were doing, which is what we are doing, our victims first, putting victims first, but importantly shaping the questions that actually reflect the way we deliver service with the communities at the moment into our new survey that we'll either do ourselves or recommission out for other providers to do in the next 12 months. That's really important for us, because the reality is we want to get the answers to the right questions, not the answers to questions that actually we no longer do, because actually it skews the figures and the reality doesn't help us improve service, and that's what it's all about.
Okay, thank you. Have we finished with this paper then? Okay, can we then move on to agenda item 6, which is progress implementation of internal audit reports. Again, do colleagues want to pick up individual issues? I again have one or two things myself, but feel free to raise your own issues first.
Can I just pick up on the second page, the environment or the underspends issues? September 2020, CFOs, FDs have agreed a form of words that will apply. The update January 2021, no further updates. I mean, it just seemed to be a matter of issuing the form of words, so I'm quite surprised that that hasn't been completed.
Julie, is there anything to say on that? Oh, Julie, you muted?
Apologies, I missed all of that. It just dropped out for me. So I heard you saying, Jim, you know, about the dates on the different recommendations, but I didn't hear what followed that. Do you just want me to say a little bit about where we are with it?
Well, it's just a matter of concern. It drifts on. It's 6 months on since they agreed the form of words, and it's not been issued.
I agree with that. I mean, I think, you know, all I can say is, unfortunately, there have been other priorities because of the operating environment. But I do now know that the form of words has been agreed. It was agreed as part of the January meeting of PCCs and chiefs. I mean, one of the things is we're in a meeting cycle, you know, where that, I mean, it sounds terribly bureaucratic, but, you know, things tend to get agreed as part of that cycle.
Okay.
Okay. Can I just go back to the first item, the recruitment follow-up? I don't know if Jason or Mark can say anything where we are with that report. I'm aware some discussions have taken place behind the scenes, and we were hoping to see that follow-up report at this meeting. So I don't know if there's any update on that.
Still need to discuss with Julie and Sharon getting that report finalised. That's where we are with it, I'm afraid. Okay,
so I think from the committee's perspective, we'd really like to see a finalised report at our next meeting, because it has dragged on, and hopefully the new Chief Constable will be able to have his input into that, and we can get it resolved. The other one, if I may, in terms of outstanding items, is counter fraud on page 5 of the report. It does seem to be taking a heck of a lot of time to get this sorted out, because I now notice we have a revised time scale of the 31st December this year on that. I don't know if that's a typing error, but it does seem to be dragging on, and I'm aware we have quite a comprehensive set of papers later on the agenda on counter fraud and strategies and policies, but this does seem to be taking a heck of a long time.
I think that. Oh, sorry, David. I just wanted to add that's why I had my hand up for, to my concerns around that, because they seem to have updated the rollout plan and then just given 12 months to complete it, which would be fine if it was completed in 12 months, but really I'd like a review after a few months to see where we are, or it seems quite a long way off, particularly with the slippage we get in a lot of other areas.
I think it was myself that provided the update in terms of schedule, and I think the problems at the moment was that we discovered we wanted to revamp the training, but it was difficult to scope what was actually required in that, and we're working through that at the moment. So I think realistically, with the anti-fraud and corruption steering group meetings only happening on a quarterly basis, it was very difficult to give a more precise date. We may well revise that as things develop, but at the moment, with the capacity that we have available for us to do the work, it was difficult to put a specific date on it.
Okay.
David, could I just follow up on that point?
Yeah.
I suppose back to both you, Aubrey, and Jason. By definition, as you said, Aubrey, this is on a quarterly basis, and if you read the last 3 updates, there's a case of, right, we met, there was a need, we couldn't make a decision, then we made a decision, then we didn't agree, and then and for something so fundamental, when we're having a look at this and we say we'll come onto the paper later on, it doesn't feel like we're matching the need, the issue, the ability to resolve it, rather than just slap it into what Julie mentioned before, which is a meeting cycle. I appreciate that, you know, we're going to be having a look at how we do this sort of thing, but it just feels wrong that we just, when we come up to something like this, that we just slap it into a meeting cycle, and that's something I'd like to challenge. That we don't just work out when the meeting is and put it on the agenda, actually we work out the need and potentially flex it if we need to. Is that a fair challenge?
It is, yes. I think one of the concerns I have at the moment, which is discussions have been ongoing between myself and Julie, is around the delivery mechanism for a lot of this work and the capacity for it as well, in terms of it's been OPCC, primarily OPCC led, and most of the capacity has been me that's been generating the work and responding to the requests for work and actions coming out of the anti-fraud and corruption steering group. And I think the delivery mechanism at the moment, I think it doesn't necessarily fit with the meeting structure. And I think it's something that does need to be reviewed in terms of moving forward, how best we generate the necessary capacity to do the work in a timely fashion, and how that fits with the current meeting structure.
I would also say it fits in there, Aubrey, with the fact that we're starting to see single points of organic failure as well, where if it's reliant on individuals, and which we know anyway because everything's tight, that's fine. That's not going away, but you're right, I'd like to see disassociated. Sorry, Jason, you're going to comment.
Yeah, it's just to give you the assurance. We'll take this offline with Aubrey. I'll have a little look in terms of from the force perspective, who's engaged from the force to look at the review of it. The reason that we need to be timely with this, because obviously we are setting our training and development plans for next year, which are finalised this month. So if we need to get this onto the agenda quickly, or even if we at least got a plan to get it onto the agenda, I need to give the assurance that we've done that. So again, certainly for the next meeting, Chair, I'm very happy for me and Aubrey to go away to have a refresh of this and just try and be more detailed in terms of, if it is 12 months, so we're clear what that 12 months actually means to us in terms of what we're going to do in that 12 months, so you can see that.
Okay, thank you. That's
thank you, Jason.
Okay. Anything else on this paper? Any other questions? Okay, shall we then move on to agenda item 7, review of compliance with governance arrangements, and it's the standard report with just the events that have taken place since the last meeting. Look relatively straightforward. I don't have any of my colleagues any questions. I don't have any personally. No. Okay, shall we move on then to paper 9, quite extensive in paper format, which is the annual review of the scheme of arrangements for all delegations, contract finance and procurement regulations. We've also therefore got extensive appendices which document the current versions of all those various documents, and we have had highlighted the amendments, of which there are a few, and are generally, I think it's fair to say, cosmetic in nature. I don't know if any officers wanted to comment on where we are on that, and whether potential changes on the horizon, for example, as a result of decisions with the G4S contract, which might require quite extensive revisions of some of these documents.
Chair, do you want to go first, Julie, and I'll tell it from a force, because we've had a conversation about this morning at Chief Officer Group.
I mean, as it stands, you know, the amendments proposed here are largely housekeeping.
Yeah.
You know, if things subsequently come out of the, I mean, there is no reason why things would need to change as a result of the decision on the G4S contract. But, you know, there may be proposals for things to change in any event. You see what I mean? The things aren't inextricably linked. So.
Okay. Jason, did you want?
Yeah, just from a force perspective, obviously, the new chief's not an opportunity to go into the fine detail about going forward with this. So obviously, he's aware of what the current situation is, but in terms of that forward look, and again, clearly, whilst recognising Julie's comments about it doesn't mean there's got to be change as a result of the transition of G4S coming back in, but clearly, from a force perspective, we would be keen to have an early dialogue with the OPC's office regarding the scheme of delegation and certainly consent as well. So it is, I think it's factually correct at the moment, but going forward, I think certainly from our side, we'll be keen to explore the opportunities as well. But it's too early to say what they look like.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Ian first, and then
thank you, David.
I've got Ian twice.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I suppose when it comes to the sort of any regs like this, the one thing I like to do is I like to just check volumetrics against it. So I always like to see what you have spent when it starts to crossing thresholds, just to see just how tight or loose you are in certain areas. It's not one for necessarily now, but I think for me, if we're going into this, it's important to just check it's sensible. So we've not set things too low or too high. What we'd expect. I just wondered if we have that sort of numerical volumetrics to just check against it. Sorry for setting the homework, guys.
Can I just say something?
Come in there?
Well, can I say something first, Julie?
Yeah.
I think this was something Gillian did for the governance group. We went away and benchmarked a lot of our limits against a number of other forces equivalent schemes. And actually, I was seemed quite generous. I think at least they weren't ungenerous compared to others. Is that right, Gillian or Julie?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. We are absolutely in the middle of the pack in terms of what the limits are. I mean, I was just going to talk about what our experience is. And our experience is that, you know, I think, you know, if we look at things where decisions are required, you know, above delegated limits, if you like, they're about right. You know, we're not overwhelmed with the need to have decisions. The decisions seem to be in areas where you would expect another look and see and you know, appropriate consideration. So you know, I don't think that our experience of operating with the regs as drafted is that either it's generating huge amounts of work, or that B, it's meaning that the limits are so high that nothing ever is subject to additional scrutiny.
Okay, thank you. Anyone got any other questions or queries?
Yeah, I think if I understood correctly what Jason's saying, I think he's saying the new chief constable would like an opportunity to think about these for a while. It strikes me as this, having had to reread them for the first time for a number of years, there are areas that could be tidied up. I mean, a lot of the observations I've got are relatively minor. So, for example, on page 30, it talks about the terms of reference of this committee, and it says the committee finalised its terms of reference and agreed them. Well, technically, that's not correct. We actually review the terms of reference, but they are given to us formally by the two corporations sole. So there's odd bits where I think if we look at them again, you can often say, well, that's actually not quite grasping it. So what I was going to suggest was I think it might be worth agreeing these as they are now, so at least there's something in place. And certainly I've got a number of observations, particularly around the procurement as well, of little bits of detail. And if we perhaps send them through to officers, and so I think can probably try and wrap them all up in an earlier review than perhaps is it normally biannually these are done, whenever would be an appropriate time.
Yeah, I think that's fine, Jim, if you want to push those through. Can I just raise a trivial point as well? You don't need to go and look, I'll just make the point. On page 31 of Finance and Contract Regs, you've got two subheadings called FR 37, one write-offs and a new one called fees and services. So something's gone wrong with your numbering there. Yeah. Page 31 of Contract Regs.
I mean, that's the sort of thing I had in mind, David.
Okay.
It appears throughout, like PFIs are knocked out, but there's not a replacement paragraph put in. So that I think, if people have got observations, if we send them through, I don't know. Yeah, is that to Gillian? Is Gillian the person who's coordinating it?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks.
Right. We finished with item 9 and we approved those the current versions. We then move on to before mentioned report on anti-fraud, corruption and whistleblowing. And I think this is one that you've done, Aubrey. Do you want to say anything by way of introduction?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. By way of introduction, I'd just say that this is a report that's produced for the Audit Committee on every 2 years. That there is a new strategy since the Audit Committee last reviewed, and that the policy has been updated. I would like to point out one administrative error, and that is that the policy as attached includes an old version of the terms of reference for the Anti-Fraud and Corruption Steering Group, and the revised version, the new version, is actually the last document in that particular item on the agenda.
Okay. Right.
Apart from that, I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, have colleagues got questions? I've got 1 or 2 issues.
I've just got a couple, David. Could I?
Right, you go on.
First was just the question of 3.9. I think it should be biennial rather than biannual. It's a 2-yearly review.
Yep.
Yeah,
you're quite right.
Yeah.
And the other was just, I wonder if I could get a flavour of the bad apple scheme under 6.1, really how that works. Are there any volumetrics? What about communication to the whistleblower? Can you give us a flavour of that, Aubrey?
I think that's probably a question that's better answered by Jason.
Right.
So yes, we do have metrics. Yes, the individual, if they are identifiable, because they're not necessarily identifiable from bad apple, can be updated in terms of what's happening. I'll be very honest, I don't like the title bad apple. The purpose of the system is to do an early intervention to prevent bad apples, if I'm very honest. But it's a national system that we obviously utilise, and to be fair, works for that need. There is some wider work we're doing around early intervention prevention for our professional standards piece of work anyway. But yes, certainly we have got data, and again, very happy, obviously, which will be sanitised, because obviously, again, we want to make sure we keep the confidentiality. But in terms of use of the system, what's happened from it, it's all built in to our strategic assessment that actually is on my desk at the minute to review for our next year's plans as well. So very happy to share the information I can do with members around that.
Thank you.
Okay. Jim, have you got a question?
Yes, just looking at the 2 documents, I think trying to draw a distinction between the policy and the strategy. I think the policy is very much, the what, and the strategy is about how we intend to go about it. I'm not sure that's necessarily coming across clearly enough. I think there could be some tidying up perhaps in the document. Look, take it very simply, there's a lot of duplication. You mentioned the terms of reference. That's in both. I think that's very much around the strategy. So I think there needs to be that sort of culling throughout it. What is a policy and what is part of the strategy? And I think the other thing is the strategy should relate to how you're going to go and actually deliver some of these things. And it strikes me that one of the big issues on the horizon where the environment's changing is the whole of the outsourcing the G4S. So I would have thought part of the strategy for the next 2 years, which this should cover, should be to look at the risks that arise during the transition to fraud and corruption, and make sure the new specifications are actually robust from a fraud and corruption perspective. So that's might be the sort of thing you put in the strategy to what are the deliverables. So I think some culling and tidying up and greater focus in the strategy would be helpful.
Okay. Anyone else? I've got a couple of things myself.
And just related to that as well, I mean, the documents at the moment refer to things like for also G4S anti-bribery policy. I mean, so I think it needs as a minimum, it needs addressing, because within the short period of time, that G4S anti-bribery policy will probably no longer apply.
Yeah, absolutely. In section 11, I think it is, of the strategy, it mentions or references G4S policies that are aligned with the strategy. That absolutely will need refreshing. At the time that the strategy was created, the decision around the G4S contract hadn't in fact been made. So although it's been reviewed fairly recently, it was correct at the time that it was reviewed. But yeah, absolutely, I agree.
So I think that, and again, even just that section you just talked about, the related documents are duplicated to a large extent in both strategy and policy, but they're not identical. There are different ones. So there is more tidying up to do there and making it robust.
Yeah.
Julie, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we should forget that the relationship with G4S will continue for a minimum of another 14 months, could be longer. So, you know, it's absolutely right that we continue to reflect that ongoing relationship at the moment. And, you know, we can review once we're clear when that relationship is coming to an end.
Okay. Jim, are you?
But yeah, just one perhaps final question for Julie, just picking up on that G4S. Are G4S, or is there a linkage between the anti-fraud and corruption group and G4S? Is there an anti-fraud lead in G4S, for example? And is there a communication mechanism between the group and that person?
Well, we do have at least one member of staff from G4S sitting on the group.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I hadn't appreciated that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a couple of things from me. In the actual strategy document, and there's a similar section in the policy, there's a section on page 3 of 9 called External Scrutiny, and it lists 5-6 bodies there who scrutinise the policy. JIAC isn't listed there. Does that not count as an external group? Because we would think ourselves as external. So you've got the HMIC external audit, custom HMRC internal audit, local communities, the media. Shouldn't JIAC be there?
Yeah, it can certainly be added. It is mentioned within the policy.
Right.
JIAC are referenced specifically within the policy.
Okay.
It's probably just an oversight from that list in the
strategy. And there's a similar. It's on the next document on 262. The same bodies are listed there, so it'd be useful if that was mentioned JIAC as well. The other thing you might
again re-emphasise the point about culling, because there's too much duplication.
Yeah, and this may be something these next couple of points, Aubrey, that you covered off in your statement at the beginning. The quality impact assessment seems to have expired in terms of the date. Is that because it's been replaced?
It is, yes. The version of the policy that was copied for this information pack was the one that was a PDF, and it contained the old versions of both the terms of reference and the equality assessment.
Right. And again, this final point, the very last page of this whole report, of the last appendix, talks about a report to the JIAC on a biannual basis, which is, I think, what we do get. But if you go back 3 pages to what's called Appendix B, the section there called Reporting Mechanism talks about an annual report on an annual basis. So there's an inconsistency there.
Yeah, you're quite right, Chair. That's the point that I made at the start of my introduction, in that the Appendix B that has got the out-of-date information that mentions the annual review, that's actually an old version.
Okay, that's fine.
That's why there's no identification mark on it in terms of version number.
Okay.
It was included in the pack by error.
Okay, thank you. Have we finished on this item then? Okay, thank you. Can we then move on to item 11, which is the annual Treasury Management Strategy paper? Don't know, does anyone from the officer side want to say anything about this? Obviously, it's a standard report to this meeting in the cycle, and it's very much in the format of the previous year's report.
Just to say that it's in advance, obviously, of the budget approval, and this document forms part of the suite of information that support the budget and are required to be approved by the PCC.
Okay. Any questions or comments from any colleagues? It looked okay to me.
David, could I just a quick question, if I may? Sorry, because it's been a rather busy Christmas. We've been selling our business, so I ran out of my ability to remember acronyms. On page 6, ESMCP, the spend line against the CapEx line in 2.1.
Is that the Emergency Service Mobile Communications Programme?
It certainly is.
That's the one, Jason. I knew you'd know it straight off the top of your head. Thank you very much indeed. Presumably, is that just the mobile units, the comms pieces?
It's the new national network system, which is not going very well at the minute. And it's not been very well for a number of years.
I was going to say, I don't think it's a new thing, is it?
Unfortunately, no, and I don't think it's going to go away very quickly either, if I'm honest, Ian, but that's another matter.
Okay. So can I just ask you a question? Because obviously we've got that scheduled in for 2022-23. Is that a capital replacement? Is that a contract? Is that going to be a one-off big hit? Because I also remember the disaster that we had last time when we tried to do one big switch to a comms system as well.
I think it's fair to say operationally it's going to be a mixture of all of it. So there's capital, there's other elements within it in terms of contracts. The issue again, as you probably hopefully appreciate, it's all being managed nationally. It's part of the national programme. Again, only this morning we've been having a conversation with Chief Officer Group in terms of likely implications financially, but just importantly operationally, because there is a concern operationally at the moment it'll be less effective than our current capability, which is, obviously you can imagine from our side, is very concerning.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Anyone? Personally, really intrigued by the government's decision in November to basically penalise authorities who've done commercial investment. As previously working for an authority who rigorously avoided it, I'm quite pleased to see that, because I don't think that's the business public authorities should be in. But so I'm pleased to see that.
Change of policy direction, perhaps.
Yes, perhaps. Okay, so we'll obviously get an interim report on this in 6 or 7 months' time, and an annual report at the year end. The next item would have been Helen, but I suspect, given she was going to be out of this meeting between 2 and 2:45, we'd probably best defer that item and come back to it and move on to the financial reporting items, and come back to item 12 in half an hour or so's time. So if we can then move on to item 13, which is an oral update, Julie, on the finance review.
I'm not sure that there's a great deal to say about this. I mean, obviously we came to you at the last meeting with the action plan. I'm not, I don't think there's anything to report at this meeting. Over the last couple of months, the whole team has been basically, dedicated to the budget and resolving outstanding issues on 2 sets of accounts. Sharon, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I think that's a fair comment. We do have a resourcing issue in terms of implementing. But also, I think in terms of the action plan, we probably need to have another look at it anyway in the light of G4S and the decision, and seeing how all of the departments work together through some of the areas for improvement.
Can we ask for that then at the next meeting as a sort of paper in terms of progress with the action plan? Mm-hmm. Ian, did you have a question?
Please, I think, and it kind of wraps up within that for me, is I know we're going to come on to, we discussed G4S, we've got scenario planning. When we got the report, I think we just have to be realistic around timescales, which might appear to be quite a long way out when you first get the report, but actually when you factor in the fact you're in budget season and account season and everything else, is realistically when can we do stuff? But also by sheer virtue of the fact that we are stretched this much, we do come back to some of the concerns in the report anyway. And I know I keep going on about single points of organic failure, but again, it's the teams have made so much progress over the last 6 or 7 years, but it is hinged upon a few people that would possibly, the whole thing's going to be disrupted when we start talking about the G4S model as well. And I'm looking at this and saying, when we get the report back, we could do something, but is it worth doing if we're going to be doing something in 18 months, 2 years time? But it just needs to be factored in. So I'd be keen to hear from it at the next meeting.
Yeah, I mean, just to say reassure the committee, the action plan, none of the actions in the action plan are yet due. So, we have attempted to set realistic timescales for their delivery.
Okay. Okay. There's nothing else on that item. Can we move on to item 14, which is the review of accounting policies, which again I think is a standard item to this meeting in the cycle in advance of the close down and preparation of the financial statements. I think the report tabled does highlight the relatively few changes that have been made to the standard assessment policies. Have we anyone any questions or queries?
Could I just ask why we decided to kind of push the depreciation on ICT out from 5 to 5 to 8? Is there a particular reason?
Yes, because in that category of ICT, they're not all short life assets. Now we have some more infrastructure systems that we're purchasing with a life and a contract life that we sign up to the provider for longer than 5 years. So we extended that policy to reflect reality.
Okay.
That's sensible, thank you.
Sharon, I have just a question on 3.1 about the risk register for the draft accounts. Do you operate a RAG status on that?
Sorry, I keep just forgetting to press mute. We assess the risk, yes, and put a score on it and keep updating as appropriate.
Can you tell us, are there many high risk items currently on the register?
I think given the experience, there's nothing specifically high risk in itself. I think our experience with EY so far has highlighted that if we were going to identify some areas of risk, then property valuations have caused us some trouble over the last 2 years in particular. I think anything else has been specific to the actual years rather than a recurrent theme.
Okay, thank you.
Also on 3.1, and I know Helen's not with us, we have interim audit date to be confirmed. Has that moved yet? Because we're virtually, well, nearing the year end. See people shaking their heads.
I mean, you might wish to ask Helen about it when she arrives, but my understanding is that EY are not in a position to agree dates for the third financial year's audit until, you know, we're completed on the current 2 years that are open.
Okay, right. Okay, we'll try and remember to pick that one up. Is there therefore a risk that to the 28th of May target date for usually signing off the accounts, and therefore probably for our workshop as well?
Sharon and I are, you know, and Gillian, we're absolutely focused on delivering that before the end of May.
Okay.
Even if the audit's not going ahead.
Right. Okay.
And I would agree that even though we still have 2 sets of accounts open, we did actually more or less meet those deadlines for completion of the accounts by the 28th of May within our organisation. The audit has been problematic though.
Yes, I'm aware of that. Yeah.
I think that's an understatement.
I was being tactful.
Very well. Far better than I usually am as well, as you know.
Okay. Anything else then on the review of accounting policies? Otherwise, we're on to item 15, which is the balance sheet report, which again is becoming a standard item to the committee. Does anyone have any issues or questions? Personally, didn't have anything.
Could I just ask one question, David, for me?
Yeah.
Just on the, it was prompted, I don't know what by, but effectively at the bottom of the first page on the long-term assets, 2.2 million on vehicle expenditure. Is that in line with what we had anticipated? And I'm kind of looking at, when we're looking at some of the CapEx stuff, is that it's the pockets that we're hoping for, the CapEx we're anticipating. We're not having to overspend or cut back. So Jason's nodding, that's good enough for me.
Yes, we've put some extra money into fleet this year because we had some old vehicles. So we did plan extra investment in year.
It's fine. I just remember that looked odd. I say just in that bit, I remember it being a lot higher than previous years, and I thought I'd seen something. That's fine, thank you.
We would even found some carriages for the horses.
Careful now, sir. It's the horses I'm worried about, to be honest.
We would love some horses. There'd be the difference it'll make to community engagement would be immense, but unfortunately we're not there yet.
Okay.
Have we pushed the drone system out further? I forgot to ask that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, we are. It's part of one of the priorities for this last year. So we've got some other capabilities. There's some technical issues at the minute just to make sure they are not going to fall out the sky, which is always an issue for anything like that. But again, in terms of where we are, we've continued to invest. We put some more investment in it last year to get some more capability, and that includes extra pilots for it. Importantly, in terms of the approach nationally with the air support units, again, drones are seen as a fundamental part of that going forward as well. And it's how we work with the nationals to do that. Let's be honest, we get lots of benefits from drones in Lincolnshire because of our geographical area. And the reality is the chance of getting air support is limited because obviously the distance to get to us at times when we probably need it quite quickly as well.
Okay. Shall we? I don't think Helen will be back yet, so we'll move on to the risk management and assurance section, which is item 16, the PCC's risk register. Aubrey, do you want to say anything about it?
Thank you, Chair. No, I don't think there's anything in particular I wanted to say by way of introduction.
Okay. Can I just kick off any issues by A new risk added, CO 53, failure to develop a resilient and effective working relationship with the new Chief Constable. I presume that's gone in almost as a standard and isn't a reflection of how things have kicked off.
Yes, it was just a, as you say, it was a major issue to make sure that we had a good relationship.
Okay. Have colleagues got any other questions or queries on the PCC's risk register?
I've got one question, and that's on page 5 of 9, the bottom one. The risk is the failure to adequately prepare for PCC elections in May 2021. I think often risks have got there are two sides of the coin, and sometimes we only assess the risk on one side. It seems to me the other side of the coin in this regard is the possibility of the elections being deferred to something like mid-October. And so we ought to think about, are there risks associated with that? And I'm thinking in particular of things like the G4S contract transition. Are there crucial decisions, or for example, that would need to be made in what could well be a PERDA issue? So I just think sometimes we need to actually look slightly wider than the narrow risk that we've identified.
Okay, thank you for that. Ian, did you at one point have your hand up?
It's no, still there. It's just a quick question. Aubrey, I'm kind of guessing, but on C09 on page 2, if there's hedging your bets and putting an arrow up and down as to which direction the risk score is going.
Yeah, it's actually it was because the risk was going upwards.
I kind of guessed that much. It's fine, but obviously we'll come on to that. But I just thought that's one way of getting around the problem.
I just had a question on CO2 about the failure to achieve value for money. Still at a 16. Is there a concern about the external auditor's opinion? Is it genuinely a 16?
I think Julie might be in a better position to furnish some detail.
I mean, at the moment, we have an outstanding issue which we're looking at that specifically relates to the value for money opinion. I mean, I can say a little bit more about that if necessary in the later part of the agenda.
Right, that would be helpful, please. Thanks, Julie.
Okay. Anyone? Any other questions on this register? This register. Okay. We therefore move on to agenda item 17, which is the summary paper of the new joint assurance map. Now, effectively, we consider this twice as I read the papers. This is the overview and summary at this point, and then in the confidential section, we get the details for individual service areas within the force itself. So we'll need to restrict any questions or comments at the moment to the general position or the mechanism for pulling all this together. And save any detailed questions on individual service areas until the closed part of the agenda. Do any colleagues have questions for Aubrey or for Jason on this?
If I can start, perhaps.
Yeah.
I thought the user guide was actually very, very helpful. I just wondered though whether it perhaps ought to start off with a preliminary one-sentence introduction to actually say what the purposes of the joint assurance map is. Something along the lines of it's a mechanism to assess the degree of confidence in the ability of the organisations to deliver strategic objectives or something. So some sort of one-line purpose I think might be useful. The next comment was just on the note 2.1 operational management. The examples given are very much related to things like policies and procedures. Resources is often an issue as well in terms of constraints. So just thought it might be worth putting the word resources in, e.g. resources, policies, and procedures. And the final comment was on 2.4, I think it is. Yeah, 2.4. Internal audit contains results of internal audits, i.e. those conducted by external agencies. But the next one is external inspection. So I think that word external agencies is wrong. I think what you're perhaps saying is independent of the line management.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there were the three observations I had. But overall, I thought this user guide was actually really very helpful.
Douglas,
Thank you.
Douglas, do you have a question? Your hands up.
No, I was just going to congratulate the team for the user guide as well. So that was it. Thank you.
Okay. Can I raise something? It's actually on the Appendix A, the action note from the recent meeting, and it's at 251, where the issue, I think it's with you, Jason, is to consider whether there's any scope for developing the templates for support services to provide a baseline position in terms of the change that's going to impact on those areas following the decisions on G4S. Has that moved on at all?
So it's Chair, it's been discussed as part of the transition work, which obviously we've got the first programme board tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
So we are, it's again a conversation I've had with colleagues that's on this call about. Clearly we need to still manage performance now and assurance now, not just about the future, what the future is going to look like. But we also recognise at the same time there's going to be quite a lot happening around that business areas that actually, whilst yes, some would argue we need even more assurance now because of the transition, but it's that trying to get that proportionality. So it's not one of those we're seeing as a priority, we need to do it now, but it's a conversation we're having about do we do some prioritisation in those areas, particularly if we know an area is going to be under more scrutiny or particularly under more pressure regarding some of the demands. And unless you be fair, the HRs are always going to be an issue in terms of capability and capacity, not just in terms of involvement around transition, but more just as importantly the business as usual when we're obviously looking to bring more officers into the force, etc., etc.
Okay, thank you.
Just another on that, Chair, as well. Just again, just to echo the thanks. I know I've said it personally to Aubrey and to Dave and the team and the work they've done with it so far. Importantly, what Aubrey and Dave have done is also do personal briefings to the senior leadership teams to explain the purpose of this. And again, to be fair, making sure it's adding the value that we see it can provide, but ultimately how we build it into normal business. It's not seen as an add-on, it's seen as a part of managing performance and assurance as well.
Okay, yeah. So I think we all agree that it's really moved things on quite well, actually. It's good to see. Okay. Anything else then on this aspect of the joint issues? Okay, can we then move on to item 18, which is the review of our own terms of reference and procedure document. I had one or two points I picked up, but I'll let any colleagues go first in terms of any comments on the documents. No, okay, can I pick up mine then? Then on the terms of reference on the third page, accountability arrangements. Is there a need to update there or somewhere in the document for the relatively new responsibilities we've picked up, like for Treasury management and for overseeing some of those reports that used to go simply to some sort of resources forum on the force side, on the PCC side? I do wonder whether these need to be reflected in the terms of reference. That was my first point. The next point is in the procedure document on page 3 at the very bottom. This is probably certainly is out of date, where it talks about the official part of the report provided via data sticks. Obviously, Glass Cubes has replaced data sticks, so we'll probably need to update for that. That's page 3 of the procedure document. On page 6 of the procedure document, and it appears on elsewhere at this point, it really is to do with the timescales for approving the financial statements, which at least for the next 2 years are not going to be July, it will obviously be September, October time. So probably that needs to reflect, and it appears 1 or 2 times things to do with external audit work probably just need to be reviewed and updated, albeit it may only be for a couple of years, but they are technically out of date. So those were my comments. Don't know if anyone has anything else. No. Okay. So we're on to item 19, forward plan and action plan. So what Gillian's done there, I'm sure you've noticed, is just pick up in the covering report the half a dozen items that came from our work just before Christmas in having a self-assessment. So they're there for you to comment on, and we'll continue to feed those in through this report as we take them forward. So has anyone any questions or comments on the forward plan and action plan following the self-assessment?
Just on the forward plan, we've got meetings scheduled for September and October, very close together. I think we just need to think about spacing them out, perhaps September and November. I don't. There's a task there.
Yeah, I have asked Caroline to look at when the September date is set to then review the October date, possibly towards the end of the month.
Yeah.
Or into.
This came about approval for the accounts, didn't it, in the financial statements and external auditors' reports, and yeah, I suspect we need maybe to spare them out. We also have apart from the workshop on the financial statements, we don't really yet have dates for any of the meetings, actual days, so it would be useful if we could get those in the diary sooner rather than later. Julie, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, and apologies to Gillian because I haven't mentioned this to Gillian, but I just wonder whether January is a bit too challenging for a meeting, given you know, where we are on budgets and things. You know, the things seem to be being more and more compressed in terms of the time we have available because of government funding announcements and so on. I just wonder if it'd be better to have the meeting a bit later. I don't know if that causes any difficulties for anything, but I know this meeting has been quite a challenge to you know, to service.
Julie, if it occurs to me that if we can sensibly slip the October to November, then we can slip the January into February or March. There's things like this Treasury management statement they'll need approving, so you probably can't go much further than March, but that seems sensible.
Apologies, Gillian.
Sorry guys, could I just double check as well, if we are keeping the September one, is it likely to be before the 24th of September?
Is that your departure date? Yeah.
That is the end of my second tenure, and my departure date, yes. I can take a hint, by the way, when it's on the 25th. It's absolutely fine.
It's probably definitely going to be the 25th then.
Yeah, whatever. To the hand, I don't care. 8 years of blood, sweat and shouting, and all down the drain.
And my departure date appears, I think, a month later.
Oh, you're covered, James. They don't mind you, Jim. They want you. That's the difference. What they're saying is not a problem.
What's happening then? Because we're going to have a few vacancies, and we will have not enough people there.
Yeah,
so that might be an interesting point.
Yes,
well, it's on the action. If you go back on the previous page, it's on the action plan to sort out the process for recruiting.
Yes. I wonder whether we thought about it at all, because it seems rather close. It takes a long time to get these things done. If I recall, I think I was It took months and months and months to get clearance, and the forms were very complex around health. And you need to make sure that when you recruit someone, they're prepared to fill out all the forms and do the clearance. So I think we need to start now, probably. It's just my observation.
I think it's often been as well the case that the person appointed is available for a meeting, but they've not been vetted. I know certainly it was my case, so I attended as a member of the public. So there are ways around it, but I think we've got to factor all these elements into agreeing the dates for the meetings from now on.
All right, Tracy, I've been on the committee for 3 years. I've only been cleared. It took 5 years to get my clearance. I've actually, even though I've got 8 years on there, it's
okay. It is in hand to pick recruitment up as we go forward.
Gillian's nodding vehemently.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else then on the action plan? I see Helen's rejoined us. Helen, we'll whiz through the agenda while you've been away, up to item 19. So, missing out obviously your part. So if you're able to take us back to agenda item 12 and the progress report, which is to be an oral update from yourself.
I can, Chair.
The thing that we did discuss and you might like to pick it up if you can, while you're away, that impacts on external audit was, we noticed in another paper we haven't yet got a date for an interim audit for the current year, and which may be due to the fact we haven't got final reports for the previous 2 years, but if you could pick that up as well, thank you.
Yes, Chair, perhaps I should start with that one then. Typically you receive an audit plan for the coming financial year, or the financial year that's about to close at about this time. However, given that both the audits for the previous 2 financial years are not yet signed off, I didn't feel it was appropriate to come to this committee with a plan for a 2021 audit. So I will bring that to the next available committee after the accounts for 18, 19, 19, 20 are at their conclusion stage. In terms of the oral update for the 1920 audit, you might recall from the last time we all met, the main issues outstanding at that time were the valuation of the property, plant and equipment assets, and the valuation of the South Park property of the Blue Light campus. There was an issue with regards to the assurances that we received from the auditors of the Lincolnshire pension funds that feed their way into the police accounts. And there was a matter outstanding with regards to our value for money conclusion. They were the primary 3 items. So in terms of how those things have moved on since, we have now received and been through the assurances that the auditors of the Lincolnshire Pension Fund have provided to us, and that work is pretty much concluded with no particular significant issues coming out of it. The valuations work, the finance team at G4S have put a lot of time into trying to reconcile for us the discrepancies that were noted in floor areas between how the valuers had valued the assets the year previous. And it would appear that they've come to a resolution on that. And so that is back with our real estate's valuation team to just work through that and make sure that they are happy. A valuation of the South Park lease has been commissioned, and my understanding here, the organisation that's providing that valuation are reporting back at the end of this month. So as soon as we receive that, we will be able to take a look at that. And at that point in time, that valuation will be flowed through the accounts. So we will be waiting to see a revised set of financial statements at that point so that we can take the audit forward and check changes, etc. I understand that the point that was outstanding on the value for money conclusion has now reached a resolution, and Sharon and Julie have agreed to share the output of that with me when it's available so that we can then form our own audit conclusion off of the back of that.
Okay, I think that is that the item, Julie, you said you could give us a little more background to when we go into private session?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Okay. If that's your update.
So that, Chair, sort of that yeah, sorry, Chair, I was going to say that really sums up the update for the 1920 audit.
Okay. Any questions or comments from colleagues? So is there a reasonable expectation then that we should get this done in the next couple of months?
Well, I think certainly from my perspective, Chair, that would absolutely be the intention. I am somewhat at the moment dependent on obviously receiving all the information that we need in order to conclude the audit. There will be financial statement as a result of, for example, the South Park lease being valued, but I don't think anyone wants these accounts hanging around any longer than necessary.
It would be great if I could leave when I don't have 3 sets of accounts open by the time. That would be fantastic if that would be okay.
Helen, could I just ask the status of the 1819 letter?
Yes, absolutely. The status of the 1819 letter is not moved on from the last time we spoke. So the only remaining issue really for the 1819 is the value for money point that we've just referred to. The other thing that unfortunately impacted 1819 was because of the concern that was raised 20 floor areas that obviously cast a doubt over to whether the floor areas used in 1819 were reasonable in the first place. My view of it at the moment, having looked at the evidence that the finance team have put together, is that it seems likely that the 1819 figures were fine in terms of valuation. I'm obviously just waiting for our real estate people to confirm that view, but that is my view, having looked at it personally. So the only matter that remains is the value for money item.
Okay. Is there anything Sharon or Julie want to add? No.
No, I think we all should share the same desire and intent to get these 2 years finished off ASAP.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. So hopefully that will be the case when we next meet.